In this video, I'm going to review the process of buying a house, starting with the pre-approval to putting in offers to actually closing on the property. Now, first, I would recommend meeting with an agent who at least knows the area. And I know personally, I think I met with an agent when I was 23 and I had really no idea what I was looking for. At least have an agent you could talk to, ask questions. Next, the three things you're going to be looking for after you just talk to an agent is you're going to want to get kind of your finances in check and your finances in order. So in a previous video, ideally you want somewhere in 7 to 12% saved based on the purchase price of the property before getting pre-approved. Since we don't want a pre-approval where you take out a loan which is 3.5% and you don't have money for reserves or closing costs, then you'll be disappointed once you see what you actually are out of pocket. And the big three here are tax returns, pay stubs, and your bank statements. So the tax returns, the lender's gonna look for 2 years of tax returns. If you're buying a house next year, they're gonna look at the 2 most recent years of filed tax returns. Your bank statements, they're looking for the last 60 days just to show stable income and no crazy purchases or any loans were recently taken out, such as a car payment or anything like that. The lender's really looking for pay stubs to just confirm you have employment history, employment status, and a steady job. It is a little bit more difficult if you don't have 2 years in that field. Each lender is going to vary. 2 years is best, and it just shows steady income that you can most likely qualify for a mortgage rather quickly. Pay stubs. You're able to start talking to a lender, and they're going to gather these docs together, and you're going to become pre-approved. With that pre-approval, that's about exactly how much you can afford at the time, bearing nothing changing with your income or nothing changes where you're taking out any type of loans or anything like that. So if your pre-approval is 300, I would highly recommend you start to want to look at property less than that, anywhere in the ballpark from 270, 280, and maybe even as low as 250, because it's really going to depend on if you're looking to buy your first house or looking to invest in property, kind of your long-term goals of where you want to start shopping for houses, because it may not make a ton of sense to shop for a house at 325 if your pre-approval is only 300, because you'll be highly disappointed when it's very competitive to get into that next echelon of pricing. And we have here the pre-approval is the working budget. So in this example, our pre-approval is 300, then I'd recommend the budget, a little bit less than that, about 10%. In the 270, 280 range is where you're going to be very competitive, because in multiple offers scenarios, you're able to increase that bid up to 300 without even thinking about it, just because you built that cushion and already looking at houses in the right price point. So next, after you have your finances in order, after you have a pre-approval, which means in this 300 scenario, your down payment is most likely in the ballpark of 10 or 12,000, and you have money for closing costs as well as repairs. You can begin to define an area. So typically the best way to do this is either school district, so it appreciates over time. That's typically in the ballpark of 3 to 4% per year, which just means you buy a house for 300. Hopefully, if all goes well, next year that house is worth in the ballpark of 309 or 312. Again, it's not worth that value until you actually either refinance on the house or sell the property. It's unrealized gain. Another way to check that is if you see your taxes go up on the assessed value, most likely the land value goes up, and so you're able to see an increase in value that way. When you do put in an offer, this is when I know I freaked out the first time this happened, just because you have large sums of money at stake and the language might be confusing in the offer paperwork. But if you take it line by line, and your agent should be able to do that, you should be able to understand it, or at least trust your agent enough so you know that you're making the right choice. With this, a few things you're going to include is the pre-qualification letter, and that's from your lender. And then you're also going to include a deposit, which is called the earnest money deposit. This is the initial deposit, which essentially keeps the deal together. It's a good faith deposit. This is typically refundable. It's either in the ballpark of 1% of the purchase price in some areas or $1,000 depending on your area. This goes with the offer as well as you sign a few papers, and that'll go over everything you want in the property. That'll go with any specific contingencies or anything like that. But an offer, let's just call that day one to keep it real simple. Day one, there's an offer. And typically within the next 24 to, I would say 48 hours, you're gonna know if your offer is accepted or they counter. If it's a multiple offer scenario, your agent should let you know. And if there's multiple offers, typically the less contingencies will help you out on the buying side. That's things such as asking for closing costs or having the inspection, but not really negotiating after the inspection, just having it for informational purposes. I really wouldn't recommend that if it's your first property, just because there's a lot of things you may not take into account when you're doing the walkthrough of the property initially. 24 to 48 hours is typical to have an offer accepted or denied on the property. If your offer is denied, you get back your $1,000 and you start back at step one, where you are going out and shopping for properties. If your offer is accepted, next thing you move to is the inspection time frame. Now this is another out-of-pocket expense that is really not talked about. So this one is something you do spend out of pocket. A ballpark for a single family is right around $450, and a multi-family, if it's a 2-unit, at least in Mass, is typically around $600, and 3 units go up to probably around $800 here. It's a different price for a multi-family, for a condo, for a single family. This money you do not get back if you're unable to move forward with the purchase. Let's just say there's something you found in the purchase where it's way too much work, either like a foundational or structural issue. You are able to back out. You do get that $1,000 back, but the money you spent on the inspection you will not get back. So that's lost. But the good news there is you didn't go in to buy a property where you're uncomfortable with the repair amount. That's almost a win in itself. And this inspection is typically 7 to 10 days after the offer is accepted. So if we look back on our timeline, step 1 is the offer, step 2 is either offer acceptance or offer denial, and step 3 is moving towards the inspection timeframe. That's 7 to 10 days from the offer. If everything goes through and you are comfortable with the terms, you either renegotiate the offer or you find an agreement with the seller that you're comfortable with. In Massachusetts, we purchase and sale, say we work with attorneys, that's gonna be the second offer which replaces the offer. And this here typically happens within 14 days of the offer acceptance. The state may be different, but in general, this is when we know you're gonna be closing on the property most likely. A lender will go through the financing, and that is typically 30 days after the offer acceptance. I didn't include that here, but we're gonna put lender. And so after your offer is accepted and the attorneys work with you for the purchase and sale, in Massachusetts at least, the next step is the appraisal. And you could only get the purchase price of the house where the house is actually going to sell, which means if your offer is $300,000 and the appraisal came back at $290,000, that either means your loan could only go to $290,000. So your purchase price would drop to $290,000, and the seller does have to agree to this. If they don't agree with this, it's possible that you can back out of the deal. It really depends on what's in the offer. But in this case, if the appraisal only came in at $290,000, that means that's what you're gonna pay for the house. So in theory, you really can't overpay for the property if you have the appraisal written in there on the offer as a contingency. It's different if you're paying cash where there's no appraisal because you're not getting a loan. And the appraisal here is typically a few days after the purchase and sale in Massachusetts. So that's gonna be somewhere around, I would say, 30 days. Sometimes it's a little bit closer to closing. It could be done day 35 if they're really backed up on doing a lot of appraisals, but in a nutshell, I would say 30 days is pretty safe. For closing on the property, typically, if you are paying rent, you definitely want to let your landlord know. I would let them know probably once it's purchase and sale in Massachusetts and you have a set closing date. Ideally, you would want to line that up with the closing date, and that can be negotiated in the offer. The final walkthrough is typically done a day or two before closing or the day of closing. A standard closing is in the ballpark here in Mass between 40 and 45 days. And that is from the offer acceptance. Final walkthrough, if there's any repairs that needed to be done that we agreed upon on the purchase and sale, those would get done there. If there's no repairs need to be made, the biggest thing you want to look for is all the stuff is out of the property, or all personal items are out of the property. Once that's good to go, you're also going to transfer utilities over in your name. And it's going to start on the closing date. You're going to be billed the utilities in your name. If it's a multi-family, you will be taking over leases, and you want to have that conversation with the tenants within the first week, just so they know who they're paying and who they're paying rent to. But that's typically 40 to 45 days from the offer acceptance. If I had to give a ballpark figure of when to start looking at houses and when you're able to close on a property, that really depends on your comfort level and I guess your scenario. Just because It could take 6 months, it could take a year, it could take 18 months, it could take 2 years. When you're looking at too many properties, you become indecisive and you're not really sure what you want. So it's critical in the beginning to narrow down exactly what you're looking for. That's why it's critical to meet with an agent as your first step. In a nutshell, the steps we're looking at here are: number one, you want to meet with an agent. And number two, you want to get your finances in order. That's your taxes, your W-2s, your bank statement. I would say number 2A, if you have debt, you want to consider paying it down so you can qualify for more. But then you're going to apply for a mortgage, you're going to meet with a mortgage lender. Your agent could also recommend you lenders as well. The pre-approval you're going to get is going to be a working budget on the property. It's best not to buy anything crazy or finance a car or anything like that when you are pre-approved, because it could mess up the whole process. Next, you're finally able to see properties once you're pre-approved. The agent and you will go take a look at properties. Once you found what you're looking for, you'll put in an offer. After you put in an offer, they're either going to accept or deny it. And this is, let's call it day one. So within 48 hours, your offer is going to either get accepted or denied. And from there, you're either going to go into your inspection period, where you're going to be out of pocket, $450 to $800 for the inspection. If the inspection's good, you're going to go to purchase and sale in Massachusetts, and that's going to replace the offer. That's about within 14 days of the offer acceptance. Then you're going the appraisal and the lender to obtain the financing. Appraisal is typically 30 days from offer acceptance. The lender is going to know if you are pre-approved and you're clear to close, typically 30 to 40 days as well. You're going to have a final walkthrough, you're going to switch over utilities, and you're going to typically close 40 to 45 days from putting in an offer.